Okay, let's make it happen right away. Okay, so hello everybody. We're gonna start the infrastructure panel. I hope you know me. I'm Paulina from ETHWarsaw. I'm gonna be organizing that panel and moderating here. And just to add a bit of a backstory, I've been in crypto for the last few years, and I also had the pleasure to work at Ramp, where I've been very directly exposed to working with multiple different products in the industry, and company have been providing them with the fiat infrastructure. So I managed to explore a lot of the infrastructure bits that were missing from the current crypto landscape, and this is some of the learnings from that time I want to pass into today's panel. And I'm really happy to welcome my very good friends on the stage today. So let's start with a round of introductions. So on my left, I have Nick from Chronicle. Nick, Chronicle is still very, very young project. How do you feel in that new situation after Maker?
Yeah, so I think it's very exciting, right? For those of you who don't know, Chronicle is an Oracle protocol. We spun out of MakerDAO a little over 2 years ago, and we are launching later this month, publicly to be usable by everyone. So, no, it's very, very exciting time for us.
Fingers crossed. I heard you're gonna make a splash. It's going to be massive. Cool. And then we have Simon from The Graph. Simon, we talked today about when we first met. I was in Lisbon. It helps to have shared Telegram messages from many years ago. It's really awesome to have you here right now. It's really awesome to have The Graph here as well.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Great. And then we have Przemek from Ramp Network. So I know Przemek, and Przemek is building fiat on ramps. Przemek, really awesome to have you here. Really good to have Ramp as well at the conference, being one of the landmarks of Polish crypto scene.
Thanks for having me.
Cool. And then, last but not least, Tom from Stamp Protocol. Tom, this is our first time meeting, so I'm really excited to see how well we're going to be vibing on the panel. You're coming from Stamp Protocol built on top of Arweave, which is, in my mind, doing the monetizing the bookmark creation on Ethereum, which I actually really like.
Thank you for having me.
Is this on?
Is it on?
Let's have a tech check if the mic is working.
Hello? Thank you for having me.
Amazing. Cool. So I'm going to start with a conference anecdote, seeing as we're already on a panel and on a conference. This year, I went to ETH Denver. That was my second time at ETH Denver, and I think I met a few friends from just the crypto community. And every time we talked, one of the main motives in our conversation were, this is just infrastructure. There's nothing user-facing being built on crypto. And it led me to a feeling that it's really a bear market. February was like a very, very deep bear market. And after all the events that happened with FTX and so on. And it's quite typical for bear markets to spin more infrastructure projects, but we're already past that stage. We've managed to recover at least partially from the blows from last year. We're seeing more capital coming towards crypto. So in that situation, is it good to still remain infrastructure centric? Are we even focused on infrastructure anymore? Is this shifting? How do you feel about that? And I want to start with Tom, given that you're the infrastructure that you're building is for content creators. So it's a bit different because it's not for different protocols on crypto, it's for an actual end user. So how do you feel about that perspective? Do you feel like we're shifting too much towards infrastructure, that it's not good that most of the projects that we're exhibiting at Denver were roll-ups and proofs and so on? It was all pretty much the same.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I'd like to, kind of see more in applications and more user-facing pieces. But as these technologies evolve, you always have to kind of invest in infrastructure and infrastructure pieces because technologies change. Now we have WorldCoin, where you have the orb, and so that's new. And from my perception, where I work on the stamp protocol, building infrastructure and then building protocols on top that can make it easier for developers to scale their products. So my focus is really, working tightly with infrastructure systems like Arweave, which is permanent persistent storage, to enable these protocols to make it really easier for developers to implement similar patterns and not have to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah, I think it's good to have common ground for applications like that. But then a question that I have is, okay, but when is it enough to put infrastructure development on hold and focus more on UX? Because just a few years ago, it was we had to focus on infrastructure. We had to do scalability because none of the applications were working because we had infrastructural issues. Right now, is it the same still?
Yeah, and from my perspective in the Arweave ecosystem, the infrastructure, the core infrastructure 2.6 was released at ETH Denver. And pretty much the founder, Sam Williams, said that the infrastructure is complete. So most of the focus is on building protocols and building applications. So from my perspective, I do think you reach a point where your infrastructure is complete. Now you still can evolve, but for the most part, I think you can reach a point where you get to a complete state of features.
I think it's good to understand what is the sort of minimal viable product that lets us to keep on building and allows us to build more on top of that. And Nick, Chronicle has spinned off from part of Maker, and what I know about that is that it arose from a need to build the right kinds of oracles for the Maker protocol. And how do you see the future development of oracles in that context? How far are oracles from being minimal viable product? Are they usable already, or are they going to be usable only after you guys launch?
So I think the narrative around oracles has kind of always been pigeonholed in DeFi into this thing of if I say oracle, what do you think of? You think of some smart contract that gives you a price, right? And it's really so much more than that, right? It's the ability to transport data, from one blockchain to another blockchain, right? And have blockchains be able to talk to each other, right? Or to power bridges, right? To let tokens be transferred between bridges, or even to just bring in data from, the outside world, right? And so in terms of adoption, haven't we built enough infra? No, I would argue that there's still so much more infrastructure to be built that's going to enable a bunch of new use cases. As an example for something we're working on that I think is quite unique is real-world assets have been, I think, kind of a very trendy kind of buzzword for the past year. But I think in terms of scale, it hasn't picked up until very recently, right? So I mentioned earlier, right, we're very closely partnered with MakerDAO, and MakerDAO is actually the largest provider of credit to real-world assets in DeFi by a very large margin. I believe it's somewhere around the $3 billion range, and the total amount of credit extended in all of DeFi towards real-world assets is probably around 3.1, 3.2, right? So MakerDAO is the majority creditor, credit provider, right, to real-world assets. Now, there are still a lot of bottlenecks in that type of area that I think infrastructure can solve, right? So in order to do a real-world asset, there is a kind of a complicated web of like legal structures that has to exist in the legal in the real world, right, to kind of represent the interest, the creditor interest of the protocol that is providing this credit. And you kind of need to collect all of this data from all of these different actors, right? Like maybe a broker or a bank or a custodian or a trust or an auditor, right? And these are not crypto literate people, right? So you have to get this data that is maybe like, you know, in a spreadsheet, right? And somehow, right, get this into a mechanism, right, that this data is automatically collected, right, automatically aggregated and automatically like pushed on chain, right? And some of it is proprietary data and can't be public and some of it can, right? But if you are able to do this, which is something that's not automated today and it's just completely manual, right? Then you are able to kind of remove this bottleneck of that is kind of like stopping RWA from growing even further, right? Because there's a very natural product market fit here where traditional finance, like rates for credit are extremely high, and in DeFi, our rates for credit are extremely low. Because in DeFi, the only thing that matters is what is the demand to speculate, and right now, nobody wants to speculate that number goes up, right? So there is a mismatch, right, of credit available in DeFi versus demand for cheap credit in traditional finance. And if we remove like the barriers to entry, this can scale like an order of magnitude extremely quickly.
I think it's super important to add that infrastructure, it's not just tech. Infrastructure, it's also the surroundings around the technology, the legal framework around that. I said that a few times to Przemek and my colleagues at Ramp, that Ramp is doing like bleeding edge stuff when it comes to legal work. So Przemek, how do you feel about that legal infrastructure around, developments in the last few years? I know it's not your topic being on the product side, but it very much affects what is possible when it comes to building new products.
Just let me first let me say that for me everything starts and ends with users, with their problems, with their needs, and the value that we can give them, generate for them. And everything in the middle, like startups, infrastructure, price, glamorous conferences, financing grants, etc., should be put in the context and should be viewed as a tool to deliver the value for the users. And coming back to your question, it's a very good question. The legal frameworks are definitely something that was missing for the wider adoption of the Web3 products, especially for the on the B2B2 market, where for example, traditional finance companies, they were hesitant to enter it without having enough of the regulatory supervisory, and they saw those markets as completely risky, unregulated, and that they don't know how to enter it and what to do with it. From one hand, you could say that it's getting better because we're getting more regulation, but I think in this room we can all agree that this is not always what actually pushes this ecosystem forward. And I think it's important to say that the one type of regulation is not equal to another type of regulation. And some countries are taking the more proactive and more knowledgeable approach, and they discuss and consult and trying to treat the Web3 ecosystem as a partners. And some of them are treating us as someone who should maybe not exist, so they're trying to regulate us out, or just trying, or they are scared, and due to political forces, they are trying to put a lot of the burden on us. So that's the aspect of the regulatory aspect. But I think you're also asking about how the infrastructure around the building the legal frameworks for companies works and looks like. And I think that what is interesting that this is critical for our existence, but the legal professionals were much later, joined much later the community than developers. And you can speculate why is that, but definitely there is still a massive need for the good lawyers in the industry that understand the values that stand behind Web3 and also want to get to the same goals that we do.
It's quite surprising to me because when you look at it from first principle, legal part and like lawyers and developers, they do think alike in terms of being, following the protocol and being very much in the system, and smart contracts are virtually contracts. So it's they have a lot in common. I think they should explore that more. But I want to wrap that up with getting to Simon. Simon, Graph is sort of like the Google of Web3 at the moment. It's just like it's measuring everything that can be measured, and I think it's eternally going to be infrastructure. It cannot be infrastructure-centric or user-centric. It just measures everything that we can see on Web3. So I think it has to stay on that infrastructure side, but there's an opening towards being more user-focused and user-friendly.
Okay, that's a very, very interesting question. Yeah, for sure, like the Graph is an infrastructure protocol, and as an infrastructure protocol, it does, like, it provides value, but in a very abstract way, I would say. Like the value creation that the Graph is providing is aimed towards app developers, and so it is in that space of like the Graph by itself cannot directly provide value at the moment to to average users who do not understand how to formulate the GraphQL query or something like that. Although there are people that are playing around with this idea of like buzzword again, using machine learning or ChatGPT, so you can go maybe somewhere and say like, oh, I want to compare the TVL from Aave versus MakerDAO, and then boom, a GraphQL query will be created, and then shows you that in a nice chart. Actually, there were hackathon projects for the hackers around here that explored this already, and it's something that's very cool. But that being said, this application that I just described is something built on top of the Graph. And I wouldn't say that I think that's actually okay. And but like to your question from before, like, do we need more infrastructure? Do we need more kind of user application? My personal opinion is we kind of have a lot of infrastructure right now at our disposal. So, for example, for a very long time, people always said like, oh, it's a very complicated experience to get into Web3. You need to have a wallet. You need to hold your private key secure. You need to then buy some ETH or whatever tokens to pay for gas and so on and so forth. But like recently I saw like a lot of new applications popping up that were very, very smooth user experiences like this. On layer 2 with account abstraction, there were paymasters. You don't even need to pay for the transactions immediately. There was no need to make the private key secure or like the seed, because like with account abstraction, Twitter login stuff work, kind of these smooth experiences. I think we are now really at that tip where this is first time possible in the history of Web3. And so I'm very positive that that more and more people will experiment with this and go more with that lens of this user focus of like what would be a cool app that a user would like to use, like average user, powered by Web3 without exposing them to the complexities of Web3. And that will be powered by the Graph, that will be powered by oracles, that will be powered by Arweave to a certain degree. Or like, these all sit in there, and I'm really looking forward to play around with more of these apps or dApps.
That's what I call this sort of minimal viable state. that the situation where it's already relatively easy to use crypto at that point, it's still not easy. I mean, try just having like a bakery sale at your company and ask people to pay $5 for a cake using crypto, and you'll see that crypto is still not easy to use, but it's much easier than it used to be 5 years ago. And this is all because we focused a lot on that infrastructure. We got the scalability to a whole new level. The throughput on Ethereum right now, it's just incomparable to what we've experienced a few years ago. Right now, we can build many more products, many more complex financial products on top of crypto. You're opening yourself to not just finance freaks, but you're opening yourself to creators, to gamers. We're getting more and more new communities brought into that, just because that infrastructure, it's much more welcoming these days. And I want to skip one question and get to the cherry on top right away. So what can we build on top of what we have already? And we're gonna follow up with a hackathon tomorrow. So all the good hackathon ideas, let's try to drop them here. If you had, a magical wand and you would like your product to be fully utilized to the brim, what would be the perfect product built on top of that? Even if, some elements are still missing, even if, not everything is figured out on the legal side, what would be the perfect utilization of what you guys have built? I'm not pointing to a first person, I'm looking for a volunteer this time around. It's not so easy coming up with use cases.
I have an idea.
Okay, go on.
I have a path. So there is this idea that recently developed a little bit outside of the graph that includes actually oracles and also Arweave, and it goes into the direction of, so let's say someone wants to build a risk protocol to ensure on-chain for a festival if it rains or not, right? So that's a heavy question. So it's like an oracle heavy question. How does the blockchain know if it actually rained or not? And then the solution might be something like, we have like very independent sensors in that area, like that are run by independent people, that they all upload like regularly all their data to Arweave about like what do they currently see, and then there is a subgraph checking or downloading that data from Arweave and creating an aggregation on top of that, and that can then compute like the likeliness if it rained or not, and then store it with an oracle back on chain to feed into the contract that finally decides if it rained or not, and according to that will distribute the money or not.
Cool. So we're leaning towards a mixture of oracles, lots of prediction markets there, are building finance on top of that, and then we're filling all of that. Cool, that's good. I think a lot of festivals could get that insurance.
I love how you asking us to fix 10 years problem on the spot on the stage.
There's a reason you have a speaking slot on infrastructure panel.
So I think just to set a stage, I think what's important to understand is that a lot of those very nice use cases that we are looking to realize and to happen. So, for example, crypto becoming the money. So, us paying with the digital assets, interacting with this, using this money with smart contracts, sending the crypto to each other, and many others solutions or use cases. They require a very strong social graph on crypto, so in the sense that they require a network of users that all are already on the chain. And the challenge there is that how to get those users on chain when there is no much value in using those services, because they offer only a sliver of value for them, and the hurdle that they need to jump over is very big. And it's getting better now with every day. So I think that the solutions that we should look for, so the use cases that we should look for that will be adopted, are those that produce a lot of value for the user today without pre-existing network of users. And that's hard. But I'm very much fascinated by the use cases of DeFi, because just let's think about the yield generation. It offers something that is not possible on the traditional markets, and that is something that for many people are not available today. And what I mean by that is think about so let me do this in full sentence. So in Western worlds, we are used to the good money and high quality currency that is stable and the inflation is not high. But in many countries that are outside of our sphere, in South America, in Eastern Asia, this is not true. A lot of those governments are are extorting money from their citizens, and this causes and also impose capital controls, and that makes the very hard to get to the stable currency for them. And what we're seeing is that in those in this, for example, South America, people gravitate towards crypto to get exposed to stable currency. And this is the value that they get from day one without having the big network around them.
I think that's the use case we can already see in remittance platforms. But still, when you talk to a platform doing remittance, when you ask them, hey, what's your problem? They're going to say there's no infrastructure to support what we're doing. Crypto is perfectly fit for that, but something doesn't allow us to withdraw money or something like that, just because the infrastructure is still not there. Also because the infrastructure is built from here. It's built with that Western philosophy in mind. So sometimes we're skipping over certain things, over certain basic things to go to something more advanced, because we take the basic things for granted, and that's not always the case. So sometimes that infrastructure is just, it's happening, but maybe it's not always happening on the right, it's not happening in the right place. Maybe we need to refocus what we're doing somewhere else to bring more value in, and then focus on the things that, you know, we find like super interesting in the end.
I think that's one of the typical ways how we fail from time to time. We build tech to build tech, not for the users.
Yeah, that's what I meant with the infrastructure. Being infrastructure centric.
Yeah, so, and I don't know how many are familiar with Arweave, but one of the primary use cases for Arweave, because it's permanent decentralized storage, and you pay for the storage up front. So you pay and you're guaranteed to have that data stored for at least 200 years. And there's an endowment model which the cost of storage goes down over time. So literally the math works out that you put data on Arweave and it's stored forever. A common meme in the Arweave community is the Library of Alexandria. So being able to store knowledge and have a guarantee that it's not going to go away, it's not going to burn down, is a very important use case. And we have several applications that do that. But the other side is to make it easier for anyone to put data on Arweave, that there is no controls, that it is so simple to upload data. And we have several applications that do that, but that's kind of a core use case. And then the second one is what we call the permaweb, and I'll be speaking about that, but just a permanent internet. So anything that you publish online or anything that you work with online, if you use the permaweb, it's not going to go away. So good thing that we did not have it in the 90s, because then you would have to see all my awful websites still today. So, but yeah, those are things that I think are kind of unique and interesting to Arweave.
I like two things that from what you mentioned. I like the fact that you mentioned certainty and just having confidence. And I think infrastructure is about providing you with that confidence, the confidence that your data will remain on the web, that you will have access to that data, that you will be able to onboard yourself to crypto, and that you will be that the data that you pull from there will be true. So all of that comes back to infrastructure and being that source of confidence in the space, source of confidence to build on top of that. And the second thing that got my attention was the permaweb, and I read a bit about that. But that's a ready-made use case already, and that's built on top of Arweave network, and it's. I marked that as monetizing bookmarks, but that's just my interpretation of that. So I would love to hear a bit more about this.
Sure. So Arweave is kind of the storage system, and then there's SmartWeave, which is its contract system. So the execution layer, Warp and Redstone are building tools for that have tools that work today. And then there's another component called Bundler, and Bundler Network allows to feed a large amount of data in at 50,000 transactions per second. So when you put all of those together along with a gateway, which is a operated node that basically distributes the data as web content. So if you store text and you say that content is HTML, the gateway will render that HTML just like a traditional web server would. You put those together and now you have a full Web3 platform that you can publish your data that users want to use and access. You can publish the application source code that can be run, and you can publish smart contracts that can execute business rules on the platform. And as a result, we've built these protocols like the stamp protocol, which allows you to stamp any content on Arweave. And we also have a universal data license. So what's important with creators is when they put their content in Web3 that they identify the rights. So you have real world rights that are legally enforceable. And then finally, we have what we call atomic assets, which are very similar to NFTs, where you can tokenize your data and trade using an exchange, a decentralized exchange. So we're really, the permaweb is very much as you said, but it is something we envision engaging the creator economy so that they can put their data and have confidence that it's not going to go away, and have confidence that there's proof of ownership, and have confidence of the ability to trade and license in a way that they have a little bit more control.
Cool. Accidentally, the way that you guys sitting is quite fitting to the type of products that you're building. So Nick and Simon, you're more building for builders, and Przemek and Tom, you're more building for users in the end. Even though there are cases where it goes a bit differently. And I know that there are learnings to be taken from every sort of side of the road here. So when you're building for builders, you want them to use that application in the right way to maximize the usage of your application. When you're building for users, you would wish that the builders who have created the tools that you're using to take your users into consideration. And I don't think that there's a lot of platform to exchange feedback about that, because I know that we've been had some cases where like, oh damn, why is this built this way? This is so developer-centric, no one's gonna understand that. So I wanted to spend a bit more time trying to get to that common ground here, trying to find some joint principles in good design behind infrastructure. How can we build products so that they will be as usable to as many people as possible? I think one thing that we already started on previously was that sometimes our focus is not placed correctly. sometimes we're not focusing on the things that will have the biggest benefit to like broad population. But I'm sure there's more of that, and I want to sort of put Simon on the stage to start with that.
Yeah, I think it's very important to solve a problem. And I think people more often than not kind of joke a little bit about us in general and say like, oh, these crypto people, they are still searching for a problem with their solution, right? And it's kind of, it might be an interesting critique that we should reflect on from time to time, because it's kind of true. But on the other hand side, I would say these crazy innovations, like the 0 to 1 innovations that we saw with blockchain technology, like let's say Bitcoin was not created in this traditional way of like, oh, Satoshi went there and created a user research and then they made a group, like, so how do you want the financial system then, and then maybe with a survey. It's very technology driven, so I think that's kind of the tension and a little bit the problem. So on one hand side, like the crazy technological innovations, they're not very usage driven, and then we try to later on find that actual usage. Whereas, and then I think that kind of distracts a lot of people of like, we don't need to talk to users, we're just creating these innovative things. But on the other hand side, I would say like out of 10,000 innovations, only one is that kind of a breakthrough as blockchain technology by itself. So, and then for all the others, like it's very, very important to listen to the users, and it's regardless if the users are kind of like developers or the users are, I don't know, another user group. It's always the same, like we need to listen to them, understand their problem, and then see how we can use our technology, our infrastructure to solve their problems. And the graph kind of, in my opinion, made that in a very good thing. I was not part of the team back then, but kind of on the user side. And we really had that problem of like, we want to display data that's on the blockchain, historic data. We want to draw charts of token prices or TVL developments or whatsoever. And that was just not possible in a decentralized way. And then the graph really solved that problem. And that's why I think like that's very cool. And I assume like for everybody that sits here right now can have like this one use case that it's really a great solution, the protocol that we are building.
The desire to over-engineer in some cases is strong in that community, but I think it's also good to look at the other end of the spectrum. So all of the scammy projects that are shouting that we're going to get you 1 million in a month and something, it's the other end of the spectrum. It's just looking at the ultimate consumer value, which is I want to get rich, and totally ignoring the underlying tech, not really putting any parts of the blockchain into that. I don't think we talk about that part because we push them totally aside. They're very much a separate part of blockchain community to what we're building here. But it's good to know that it's not just the developers that are being overly anal about their tech. It's the other side is doing that. The other end is doing that as well.
So I think it's not necessarily that like developers of infrastructure are like oblivious to all of these like grand use cases. It's more just the kind of sober acknowledgement, right, that, well, what are people willing to pay me for today so that we can like survive? And how I mentioned right earlier, right, oracles get pigeonholed. I have some amazing ideas of like real like problems that we can solve where oracles are like a critical component of this. But then in DeFi, someone just comes up and like, hey, I need a price oracle for BTC. And you're like, and I'm willing to pay you for it. And you're just like, oh, well, great, cool. We'll definitely sell you that, right? So like on the more macro scale, right? Like what are blockchains good at? I mean, they're credibly neutral platforms for building systems on top of, where parties can interact with each other in a deterministic type of way. And that lends itself really well to systems engineering, right? Which maybe you kind of think more of as like infrastructure. And the complexity of it, right, doesn't necessarily lend itself very well to like direct to consumer. But I don't think that doesn't necessarily mean that we can't solve like those types of bigger problems. I think it's just benefiting real people with crypto where they don't even know that they're using crypto. So like one of the things that I think would have a profound impact on the world is right now we have all of these different currencies. And let's say you have some dollars or euros in a bank account and you go on vacation and they have a different currency. And now you want to spend some money, right? You're in Poland and you have zloty. And now, you know, your credit card company or your bank is charging you some insane fees, right? Which are percentages of the transaction, right? And like for an individual transaction, you know, maybe we don't notice it. But when you think of all of the economic activity that happens in the world, which is like trillions of dollars annually, I mean, this is just like, these are just parasites, right? And there's no reason that like you really need this. Like I think one of the things that blockchains lend themselves really well to is the globalized like accumulation of liquidity. And right now we have like regionalized liquidity, right? Where it's like, oh, the New York Stock Exchange has liquidity for like some set of stocks, right? And the London Stock Exchange, and you know, we have in Shanghai, we have another one, right? Crypto is not like that. Crypto is just like, you LP into a pool, I LP into a pool, you LP into a pool. We make like a little LP milkshake, and it's a global like liquidity pool that anyone can access. When we can get people to the stage, right, where you know, I think Gnosis Pay is kind of, or Gnosis in general is going in this direction, right? Like they have this Gnosis Pay kind of product that they just released, right? And there's this stable coin, right, Monerium, right, which is a Euro-pegged stable coin. And you can have like, say, USDC or DAI in your Gnosis safe and like spend euros on this Gnosis Pay card, right? And in the back end, right, it's basically just going through an on-chain liquidity pool, right, where you're getting the real-time exchange rate of Monerium, euro-backed stablecoins, you know, to USDC or to DAI, right, and avoiding this whole like bank just charging you a 3% convenience fee. Thank you very much, right? And these types of solving these problems, like, you know, it's not necessarily very sexy. Like I think it's like super cool, right? But it can have a profound impact on the world, right? Especially when we start looking into like what the developing world is, what kind of rates they're paying with respect to remittances,
yeah,
right?
I very much like the topic of Gnosis Pay because for me this is a perfect case of a use case that was enabled by the growth of infrastructure. Because if you look a few years back, there was a company called Monolith. They did the exact same thing, but they did that in a moment when Ethereum was not scalable at all. It was impossible to get money in and out. The fees were tremendous, not just on the transactions, but also on going in and out. And right now, a couple years later, we can actually do the thing that was way too difficult to use a few years back. So that's a massive success for infrastructure. And I don't think it gets enough attention outside of the community, but I think it's like a massive win for the infrastructure. It's not just the work of the Gnosis team, it's everything else that contributed to the fact that right now we're much more scalable, much cheaper, much more efficient. We know much more about how to deal with banks, how to make the transactions work. And it's just a different level at which we're operating at the moment. So it's like a massive infrastructure win. I still have a few more minutes before we go towards the question round. So I just have one last question for you guys, and let's make it a fun anecdote. There's a saying that, you know, bad infrastructure can kill a use case. If it's not a saying, I made it a saying. I would love for you to give me an anecdote from your bonus points, if it's personal history, of bad infrastructure that killed a use case. Something, maybe some good and bad developments from your team, something that gave you some awesome learnings about how to build products in the future. Bonus points if it's from your teams. It doesn't have to be. It can be like, you know, general crypto.
Okay. So challenge accepted. We started Ramp 6 years ago, and we started Ramp with Shimon, who's sitting there, because we were trying to do another startup. We were working for someone else, and we were trying to do a decentralized lending network, very sexy, very interesting, very fascinating stuff. But it was impossible because there was no on-ramping services. So we decided to build something to solve it. So we started to build something that would let users access crypto by buying and selling crypto easily. And we said, yay, so this is the very nice problem to solve, but let's just sparkle it a bit and add to it more infrastructure work. Let's take an even more harder challenge than just solving this one small problem. And we thought, okay, so maybe we can build an on-ramp that is decentralized, trustless, open, transparent, like that we have many stakeholders, that the fees are low, that we rely on the new type of access to the traditional financial system.
I think it also did, like, it allowed liquidity providers to earn interest on top of that. So basically,
Yes.
it did backflips.
Yes. So we started to like, oh, so we have this one single problem, which is I want to get 100 euro of crypto on my wallet to use it somewhere else. And when we were thinking like, okay, so maybe we can just, instead of solving this one problem because it's like too simple, let's do it in all those other ways. And I would say that, I don't know if the right word is wasted, but we spent on this 2 years of our life on trying to push into this direction, trying to solve all those different issues, and conceptualized and built too much infrastructure. And it was impossible to maintain. It worked, but and it was something that was like very interesting achievement from the engineering standpoint. But it was too hard to use for the users, and it was too hard to maintain. And we had raving reviews, but just few of them. And it basically maybe not killed the use case, but it very much slowed down of our progress. And we started to have more commercial success only when we decided to scale down our ambitions and focus on the only one problem that is actually out there, which is how to move crypto from money from Web 2 to Web 3 in easy and smart way.
I think it's a good example of taking a different approach to something and then pivoting once it just makes once it started to make more sense that it's just one crucial part of a piece of infrastructure that is missing, that needs to be delivered before all of those other problems are solved. Amazing. Thanks, Przemek. Bonus points for a personal story there. Cool, guys. I think we still have a bit of time for questions. I can see absolutely nothing, but if there are any questions, I think Robert will spot them in the background. In the meantime, guys, any more stories from your past? Any more failed projects that turned into successes?
Yeah, I have one, but it's a little bit a very technical problem that we had. Like before I joined crypto or Web3, I tried to do traditional startup stuff, and so I know for the engineers amongst us, you might remember this service. It's still around called Heroku, where to host webs or like host the whole server and website stuff. And it was very convenient back in the days to just click and in a marketplace to get different APIs that power a modern website, like authentication and databases, caching and storage layers and everything. It's just there, and we can click on and go into subscription with all of these providers, which was very cool initially to kind of very quick start to ship. building on top of them, but then like over the time it really became a headache pretty quickly because all of these centralized API providers, they said, oh, we updated our API now a little bit, we have this feature, but we deprecate also these other features. And so I had maybe 10 of these providers, and all of them, like, and every week or month, like they started to make these updates, and at some point I was just like more or less not shipping new features anymore, but only just kind of investing so much time to keep my own stuff just running because they were kind of hunting me to do this. And that was this was a bad experience. That's why I really also like this idea of the perma-web, or also what the graph a little bit says of these unstoppable applications or unstoppable APIs, that like as soon as like a developer signs up to something, like to have that guarantee that this thing just runs, like also with the blockchain. Yeah, so that's the learning. Go for open APIs and open systems.
I think being able to get to that point where you can provide unstoppableness for your users is a massive, massive achievement, especially given SLAs in crypto are not a thing just yet. Like, do you have a different standpoint on SLAs in crypto? How do you approach that with Chronicle?
So I think Oracle's is probably like the easiest one. In this respect, right? Because what happens if you choose the wrong Oracle? Well, like, Oracles are kind of like the Achilles heel of your protocol. Like, something happens to your Oracle, like, you just blow up, like you die. If you look at like half of the exploits that happen when like a protocol gets like drained, it's usually some kind of like Oracle manipulation type of exploit, right? And like, I remember in, what was it, like 2017 or 2018, right? People were like, well, why do I need to use like, you know, an Oracle? Why don't I just use a DEX as an Oracle? And everyone's like, oh, I'm just going to use Uniswap, right? And then, you know, you could just take out a flash loan, manipulate the price on Uniswap, and then go and drain whatever protocol was using, you know, Uniswap as an Oracle, right? And this is kind of what happened to BZX. Actually, like, I think they were one of the first, like, major ones to get hit. BZX was a lending protocol, kind of very similar to Aave and Compound. So I think they were like one of like the three big ones at the time. There was like Compound, BZX, and like another one from India called like Nuo or something. And anyway, so they got like pwned by this exploit, and then they like said the next day they're like, okay, we fixed the exploit, and then the day after that they got hit by the same exploit all over again. So that was interesting. I think they're called like UkiDAO now. They did like a rename. But you know, I'm not trying to pick on them in particular, right? This is just like endemic, right? You know, we saw the same thing happen with Rari Finance, right? Rari grew to be a quite substantial lender, right? And a lot of their pools, right, were powered by, you know, Uniswap oracles, which, you know, were easy to manipulate. And now that we're on proof of stake, right, are even more easy to manipulate because you don't even need to, you just need to wait until, as a validator, you propose 2 blocks back to back, and now no one can even like front run you to like take your money that you used as capital to manipulate the pool in the first place, right? As a validator, you propose, right, what transactions are or are not included in the block. So in one block, you can, you know, totally unbalance the pool, and in the next block, right, you can like, after you've done your exploit, you can like rebalance it and get all of your money back. So yeah, there's definitely penalties to. There's a proven history track record of penalties when it comes to choosing the wrong oracle, right? And that's reflective of like other pieces of infrastructure as well. But I think oracles are like the easiest one to kind of like convey this story.
In that case, bad infrastructure can actually kill your product. If you choose the wrong one, it's just gonna wipe you totally out of the stage. Robert, do we have? We do. Okay, go on.
So, simple question, you can just give one word answer, and I would like every one of you to respond, including Paulina, which is one consumer grade app that is almost an offense that it doesn't exist, because the entire infrastructure for it to exist is already there, and it is a no-brainer to build.
I think we had it. Remittances. I think remittances are ripe, especially because money transfer now got much better, much easier. But I think the crucial part with remittances is like when I would say when people receive money on chain, then like the question that they say usually is like, so how can I eat now with this thing that I have on my phone? And then so that's where I think entrepreneurship comes in. I heard of one guy that works in I think in a Caribbean island or something like that, and then they said like, okay, the big problem is like how to bring money from chain back into the meat space or meat world. And then they partnered up with supermarkets or like smaller markets. So people literally can go there now with their phone and say like, hey, I have this QR code. They scan the QR code and then they receive cash in the supermarket. And I was like, wow, okay, this is super smart. Like you don't need to have a bank, but you need to have a smartphone and supermarkets to just get your money.
I like the concept of including also sort of like point of sale devices there. Sometimes sometimes you're not going to go to a bank to withdraw cash. You're not going to go to ATM, but you can do that with someone who's going to be acting as the sort of point of sale. And I think when you look at remittance, you can actually relatively easily implement that that as well, and that could help with just liquidity in the markets where local currencies are not that stable. But personally, I would add to one killer app. I would add something that something's kind of like friend tech, but not in the way that they did that, because it's sort of scam. It's kind of weird. But being able to monetize your influence in a more decentralized way and make it more traceable and more accountable. So something like friend tech, when you can sort of keep score and so on, but maybe not as gambling looking as it is. I think it's something that Blends is effectively leaning towards, building social media on chain. I think for the current crowd that would be super useful, and I think it would also give more accountability, like demand more accountability from current influencers who are very much unchecked and unchallenged, and that's a massive, massive market that we're sort of ignoring because it looks silly. And that's something that could very much benefit from having that crypto component underneath that.
Small scale, dynamic, automated insurance for small use cases. There's a lot of risk, especially when you travel around the world. And think about something that Revolut was trying to implement, which was like automated medical insurance in every country that we are moving to. And they discontinued the product, and this could be done if we have enough infrastructure.
From my perspective, there's several, but one that resonates because we were kind of talking about it earlier is so Arweave's permanent data. There's 1.2 terabyte and growing tremendously, but a search engine that is able to use the graph and use the indexes of Arweave plus the stamp protocol to determine, because stamps are human provable likes, so you can use that as a kind of page rank so that you can get really good search results or really good machine learning AI results as well. So a search engine for Web3.
I think we're good. Thanks, everybody. Lots of good ideas for the hackathon. Thank you so much for joining me on the panel. And thanks, everybody who tuned in on the audience. And we'll see you around later on.